Welcome to this week's Monday Live, where we start links golf season over in Europe. Open Championship round the corner and, well, last major of the season, but totally different style of golf. Always fun to see, Scottish Open, Open Championship, proper links golf. We hope for some wind. It's been baked out here. We've got bright beating sunshine down. The courses are drying out. We've had a load of rain, so the rough's up. So there should be some stern tests of golf coming on the links for the tour players. Brief roundup, some really exciting finishes over in the US. John Deere Classic, Gotterup shooting a 62 to win. Max Homa shooting a 64 in the last round and not winning. You're going to have to think you're going to be up there, but Gotterup 62, 9 under last round. Absolutely incredible. He's a style all of his own. It's not one. Not gonna lie, I don't enjoy watching his game. I admire it massively, but God, I mean, to shoot that kind of number, really impressive. He's good at links golf as well. He's got that kind of on top of it, driven, delivered position where you can flight it. So could be dangerous the next coming weeks, especially Open Championship at Birkdale. Really useful that to be able to flight the ball. Over in Europe, in DP World Tour, Michael Hollick finishing off, again, an amazing finish. Leader in the clubhouse, knows what number he's got to shoot. Birdied 17, a par 3, stiffed it with a long iron in hand, and then eagled the last hole. Shot out the semi-rough to 15 foot, straight in. Heck of a finish. And Champions Tour, Porrick Harrington winning the US Senior Open by an absolute canter. He won it by miles. Totally in control. Very impressive golf all round. Just some incredible finishes. And anyone needs inspiration for what the game can do, well, just look at that. I mean, some unbelievable finishes. So a very exciting weekend of golf just gone. On that note, golf-wise this week, we have our golf day on Wednesday, but we have a charity auction page running through this week. It went live this morning at 9 a.m, raising money again this year for Great Ormond Street Hospital charity. It's something we've got a very close link to here, but we had a great amount raised last year. We've got some wonderful auction items on there. There's a hosted 3-ball at Queenwood as one of them, a tour of McLaren Special Ops, set of McLaren irons. This week we actually got Otmar Safnar, who's past team principal of Alpine Racing Point Force India. He's coming to do the chat at lunch on our golf day as well. So very much a car theme this year, a little bit more than others. But there will be on our Instagram page, there's a link to that charity auction. So it runs all the way through till Saturday at 6 p.m. So if there's anything you like the look of on there, check it out and put a bid in. You never know, you might get something great. But there's some wonderful prizes on there, or items. So if you can give generously, that's so gratefully received and appreciated, and goes such a long way to doing great things. Had a great total last year, raised 17,000 via that page last year. Love to match it this year, but we're very grateful for any donations you can give, and hopefully you can do something or pick up something that's a little unique and a little interesting. So thanks for that, and better get on to the questions. So thanks for joining us again this week. I'm going to start off with Simon Muggleton. Evening, Simon. Do CB shafts just affect how much you feel the head, or does it actually affect the swing weight? The answer is both. So by CB, the CB stands for counterbalance. So what that does is you take any shaft, it has a total weight, a raw weight, dead weight, and that's normally what the numbers on the shaft, so the denotions on the shaft, whether it's a 6, a 7, a 65, a 772, that is an indication of the base weight of the shaft. But you then also get different balance points within the shaft. So this one that's in my driver here is fairly tip balanced, but counterbalanced is more grip end. So something like a Tensei Orange, something like the Nemesis from VA Composites, or the Sinister CB, that CB moniker, counterbalance, that means that the weight position in the shaft, the balance point in the shaft sits higher up. So it does a couple of things. It will lighten swing weight, and it could give you, as a result of that, will reduce the feel for the club head. Functionally, what it does is it reduces the prominence of the bottom end of the club in terms of the mass and how it moves. So ultimately, if you want head weight, we're trying to get the club to drop down and in, almost to delay the hit a little bit more. If someone tends to kind of flip it over, you can use that balance point to delay the hit a little bit. But if someone struggles to square the face up, or the club wants to kind of get stuck behind as you start down, if it tends to drop underneath, actually you can use balance point, bring it more towards the handle to help that club get out in front a little bit more and to help it square off. So you're using balance point to manage how much effort and rotation is required to square the face. So if someone struggles to square it up in the same way you'd go face balanced or some of the zero torque putters to reduce the resistance of squaring the toe up, we do the same thing with balance point in the shaft. So it does reduce swing weight, it does technically reduce the feel for the club head, but functionally it makes it easier, can make it easier to square that face up. So there's the multiple things it does do, but you're correct on both those counts. The first cut, is it weight causes strike to move vertically on an iron, e.g. DG S400 strikes lower on the face and more toe side of center, and KBS Tour 120 slightly higher on the face and more heel side of center, and the follow-up S400 in a ZXi5 and KBS Tour in the Pro 243. So some of what you're experiencing could be CG position in the head. So ZXi5 has a lower center of gravity than the Mizuno head. So you're going to get, you can get the same strike point on the face, but it sits higher up proportionate to center of gravity. So that will have a bit of an effect on this. But what the weight's going to do, it's going to affect how you deliver the club. So if one club gets it dropping underneath a little bit more and gets you into the bottom of the ball a little bit more, it's going to get the strike up the face. It could also, if it gets a little too far behind, pull in and get towards the toe a little bit as well. Whereas, mind you, actually you're saying it gets lower on the face. Whereas the KBS Tour is lighter, it produces a different line through the ball. So essentially, the mass is going to affect how you're able to control that club head into the back of the ball. And the shaft that's better for you is likely to get more centered and higher up the face. Most of the time, is a general rule of thumb. For some players, it's going to be, a heavier shaft's going to create a thinner strike. For some, it's going to get them deeper into the ball. There's no absolute, I guess if you go heavy, you're generally using the weight to take the player down to the ball. So if heavier suits, that's going to get it into the bottom of the ball and strike up the face. If it's too heavy, then it's either going to get it fatting or thinning. Too light, and actually it doesn't get you to the bottom of the ball. You can end up thinning it and maybe a little bit heel or toe side. But really, it's how in sync the player and the club are. The better the club setup, the more you're able to turn, stay in posture, stay in balance, and repeatedly put the head on the same place. So the answer is weight will affect. They will both have. For some players, you're going to get one working and the other not. So it isn't a case of one does this and one does that, because it will be different player to player. But ultimately, the better the weight is, the more repeating your strike's going to be. And depending on what your swing does, that will dictate whether the lighter or the heavier is better for you. But it won't be things like droop effect on those two shafts, because they're just too similar in that respect. That if you go to a Project X60 and think of a much softer profile Dynamic R300, then yeah, you're going to get slightly different droop and loading of the shaft, a little more toe droop. That will change strike point very slightly and change feel a lot. So you've got to change the flex profile or the bend profile of the shaft. Okay. Yep. I'll just keep mumbling away until you tell me it's... Yeah? Yep. Apologies for that. There's a gremlin in the system we're trying to work out. There's nothing obvious, but apologies, it keeps dropping off. There's loads of capacity and power in the PC. Trying to work that one out for you. So essentially just to top and tail that last bit, shaft profile itself between those two won't be the deciding factor. It's just one will be a better weight. Yeah, ready to go. Apologies, if it happens again, there's clearly something going and we'll have to end the broadcast because it's just can't cut out too regularly, but apologies for this. We are trying to sort it out. So I move on to the next one, Noel, 1988. Evening, Simon. I've got my eye on a cheap set of Mizuno MP58, 3 to pitch. I'll have to get the loft and lie adjusted as I don't know the spec. Just wondering how much they can be bent before they're useless. I'll never use 3, 4, and 5, just 6 to pitch for some fun every now and then. So you can, a forged head like a Mizuno, the quality of the head, they will bend quite a bit. I think the key thing is how sympathetic that bend is. If you do it gradually and slowly rather than just one hit, you can probably get, well, from standard, you can easily go 2 either way. You can get more out of them than that. So it's just, it requires, say, sympathy to the club rather than just wallop and moving them. So doing them gradually, doing them, depending on how much you need them to move. If they're, for example, 2 up and you need them 2 flat, take everything from 2 up to standard, run through them all, and then go back to the first one and take that one from standard to 2 flat. It just gives the metal a little bit of time just to settle. And so doing it gradually is just a little bit safer. Try not to neck them. You can mark them moving them that much. So it's a case of doing it sympathetically to the club head. But yeah, I mean, there are some heads we've burnt 4 or 5 degrees from standard, but chances are you're going to get some marking on the hosel doing that. So just be careful from that. But those will move quite a long way. Really good soft forging. Papa B, hello young man, good evening. In my youth, I was fast and hit my irons high. Now I'm old and slower and still hit them high. Angle of attack with a 7 irons -4, swing speed 86. Well, you're not slow anymore, that's for sure. What can be done in a fitting to lower flight? Well, there are a few things. I mean, there's head style and loft are the most direct things. So if you're hitting them too high, then if you've got a very low CG head, then that will have a bit of a change in ball flight. That'll help to pick it up a little bit. But ultimately, it just depends on what the loft is. So if you're launching your 7 iron with too much launch and spin, then for each degree of loft you knock it down, you're going to take a few hundred revs of spin off. Not a degree of launch. Ironically, it won't actually make as much of a difference as that, but sort of 1/2 to 3/4 of a degree of launch angle. So a couple of degrees, you should see 5 or 6 yards of ball of distance change, 500 odd revs of spin difference at a degree and a bit in terms of launch angle. So I think I would look at that first. Loft is the most direct way of doing it. If you're hitting them well and timing them and striking them cleanly and have got good dispersion, use the loft first. Shaft technically could change it very slightly, but it's more the fine tune. You've got a way more direct change from that loft change. And if it's still popping up too much, then head style will be the next thing, but do loft first. 2 degrees will be noticeable. You'll see a difference in ball fight for that, so I would do that first, as long as the heads you have will move. Nicholas Skirnett, 4276, trying to decide between Golf Pride mid-size, grip built up, and standard oversized Jumbo Max. What do you look for when grip fitting? So, well, grip weight is a critical thing to look at. Now the Jumbo Max, I've just lost where I was. The standard oversized Jumbo Max could get quite heavy. So just look at you can go on their Jumbo Max website and look at the grip weight. You can do the same with Golf Pride. A tall velvet mid-size or a standard multi-compound mid-size are around the 56, 57 gram mark. It's only a few grams heavier than a standard grip. And the standard oversized Jumbo Max, the light is actually quite light. That's similar weight, maybe 50 odd grams. I'd have to double check the exact one. But the not light version could end up being noticeably heavier. So have a look at that as one element of it. And really we're looking at, I mean, ultimately from a kind of the baseline is how does it fit someone's hands? What size glove do you use? You know, how does it sit into your fingers? Are you able to get the grip? And this is the traditional way because there are other elements to this. Are you able to get the butt of the club there in the fingers, but just a light contact of tips of fingers to the pad of the thumb? And then on the bottom hand, want to see it, I'm going to go around this way, want to see that trigger finger settled around. If it's too small, then it kind of hangs off the grip and it can move around. But I want it settling into that trigger finger snug nicely so you can get it round half the grip, sits in the hands, and you're not having to grip on for, grip really tight for grim death to stop it twisting. You want some freedom. So there's that side to it. But then we're also looking at, does a grip size change someone's patterns through the ball? If you're someone who uses your hands to square the face up, then going too big in grip can lose some of that control. If you're very much kind of body rotation player and you use your turn to square the face up, then you can get away with a slightly bigger grip. But some of it's also just comfort and feel in the hands. It's got to feel right to someone. Did a fitting recently where we went for a +4 mid-size style or size of grip, when actually you look at the hand size and actually a traditional sort of standard size, maybe one extra tape would in theory fit, but it was very much that kind of body turn and that bigger size felt more stable in his hands. So there are lots of layers to it, and ultimately it has to work in practice rather than in theory. But if you can go somewhere, you can try the different sizes on a club, swinging it and see how they feel, see what effect it has on the weight, on the balance, and work out what works best for you. That's the way of doing it. But ultimately, it's a in practice thing it's a mixture of theory and practice ultimately, because we've done clubs where I would never have thought we'd go to that grip size, and it's actually worked out well. So it's something that we're covering more and more and more. But actually seeing, I think, more players open to trying different grip sizes. Sometimes it can just feel too different. But like for me, if I go to a jumbo size, I don't have big hands. I play 3 extra tapes on a standard grip. I can get away with a mid-size. If I go to jumbo, I struggle to square the face up. So, but going down a size, I end up, if it's too small, I end up having to really cling on to it. So it's sort of seeing where the comfortable parameters are, where your kind of top and bottom limits are, and if you've got the ability to test some out, try them, and then that way you don't have to change all of them. Maybe get a club built up with that size so you can test it out in the real world on the course as well, and that way you can do one rather than do a whole set and then find that it was the wrong thing. So that would be the ideal way of doing it. Per Odemark, good evening, Per. What have you bought or planning to do for your own bag this year? So I haven't done anything yet. I will update my wedges. They're getting a little bit old, and just freshening them up. I've not played the last few weeks a huge amount, and I kind of thought I'm just going to leave things for kind of comp season. Had club champs recently, and just didn't want to change anything before then. Back's been a little stiff. So I will be testing the new drivers. I will be doing a video about that when I get around to doing it, probably in a few weeks' time. So drivers up for a potential change, going a hair lighter in shaft, potentially, and then a refresh on the wedges. But other than that, not planning anything. Everything else is working nicely, so yeah, happy with everything else. Pro V1 David, follow up from last week. Golf Pride to Ping Aqua, would adding an Arcos sensor help to restore original swing weight? So essentially, the Aqua is likely to be a little bit lighter, which increases swing weight. Adding an Arcos sensor, I'm assuming, is that a bit of a counterbalance? The answer is, but the Arcos sensor goes above the grip, so essentially doesn't form part of the grip, even in the ones that have the sensors built into the top. that still sits above the top of the shaft, essentially above the bit that you're gripping. So I wouldn't use the Arcos sensor to do that because it's either not on the club at all. It's actually sort of either screwed in the top and sits out the top of it. And they do add a little bit of weight. So in principle, the principle kind of works. I guess if it's a small amount like that, you might get away with it. The more I think about it, the more I think you might well get away with it. I think as long as because it sits above the hands is interesting rather than sitting through the grip, it has a marginally different effect. But actually with that difference, if it's the old screw ones that are about 6 or 7 grams, then yes, that probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So it's something my initial reaction was, be careful with that one, but actually that might well do the job for you. So yes, that's probably not a bad shout, actually. Dan France 8506, please could you hit a T100 mid-iron with a Project X LZ120 and LZ125 to compare numbers and feel. Great show as usual. Thank you. And then Dave Hurley saying, evening Simon, love these. Thank you very much, Dave. Some good scoring recently, by the way, as well. Right, I'm just going to grab those few shafts and heads. So we've got LZ120 and 125 and T100. So, did have a T100 there. Thank you very much. Just had to get the T100 back off one of the fitters. So I'll start with the 120. So really, I mean, so the LZ, for those that aren't familiar with that shaft, has lots of little, you can see all the ripples. You might be able to see the ripples in the shaft here. So it has lots of essentially steps very close to it, very close to one another. So rather than long steps, the steps are a way of narrowing the shaft down. So getting it wider at the grip end and then narrow at the club head end. And functionally, that's the main thing of what they do. However, by making it narrow quicker, essentially it softens this bit a little bit more. So it softens quicker down the shaft as it gets narrower. So LZ stands for loading zone. Essentially that section of the shaft loads a little bit more, has a little bit more kick to it. So the standard Project X, the original Project X, is quite wide here. This section, this sort of mid and upper section, is the stout bit of the shaft. So this gives a bit more feel. But the LZ, as a shaft, swings a little bit more tip heavy. So it swings the weight more down the bottom end of the club, more towards the club head than the original Project X does. So, right. So we start with the 120. So like this is heavier than I play, so I've got to work this a little bit for my swing. So dead weight's about 7 grams heavier than what I play. So it's still, you know, the 6.0 is still quite a stable shaft. It's not a harsh profile, but like it's a Project X. None of the Project X are weak shafts by design. So it's just a little bit more responsive. So it doesn't feel like you've got to work this bit of the shaft quite as hard, but there's still a very solid feel at impact. Shot. So that one there, 16 odd launch, 5.2 on spin, very neutral from a flight point of view. So by going into the 6.5 flexion to the 125, you're going 5 grams heavier. There's structurally a little bit more rigidity, so it's going to play a little bit more stout, feel a little firmer, but it'll feel firmer both because of the weight and the actual structural strength of the shaft. So, you know, there's just more club to swing. So I'm going to have to work even harder with this one. So what does that mean for the golfer? Well, it means if the 6.0 is the better weight, then this one's going to want to get a little bit more in behind and need to be fetched a little bit more. If the 6.5 is the better weight, then it stays with you a little bit more. There's a bit more to pull against and a bit more to build speed with. And the 6.0, you're almost going to have to back off a little bit because it's going to get into impact a little bit too soon. But yeah, pickup, this is quite a sturdy beast. So essentially, I've got to get the club to the ball a little bit more. Now, people say, oh, if you go stiffer, it knocks the flight down. 16 5250, what are we looking at? Spin launch difference of the launch is 0.3 and the spin's 14 revs. So the main thing is I've swung the heavier one at 88 and the lighter one at 87.8. There's a half a mile an hour difference, so there's 2 yards difference. But I've got to work harder to get that through the ball. So whilst you might look at that and go, okay, well, it's gone, well, that's total, so it's gone a little bit further. That's a good thing, right? But the problem is that if I've got to work hard and I get out of balance, then a miss is more of a miss. So really, it swings, the shafts play very similarly, other than the weight progresses, the structural rigidity progresses, and therefore, really, it's just that the player has to work a little bit harder to get the best out of their shaft. So that one, where I'm getting a little bit more fetchy with it with the hands, that's now popped the flight up. It's gone a degree and a bit higher launch, and the spin's up another couple of hundred revs. So the better one for the player, I mean, 0.5 on the rifle scale of frequency change is barely even half a flex range. You're looking at such a small percentile change in how that shaft actually reacts and what it does. The way to differentiate between the two for you as a player is which one can you be more repeating with. So I can go back to that 6.0 very quickly on this. You know, I've got to catapult that 6.5 at the ball to get it through, which means a little bit more variation in launch and spin. If I don't have to work as hard with the 6.0, then I'm able to control the impact point a little bit more. I can stay more balanced. I can feel that's a more stable delivery, and I've covered it a little bit more and kept the flight down and forwards a touch more. But I can be a little more efficient with it. So for me, between those two, straight away I'm erring to this one because I haven't got to fight it. 6.5, I've got to fight to get it through the ball, whereas that one, more controllable. But you know, 6.5 will feel more solid. It's going to feel more stout because it is. But ultimately, which one are you more in control of at impact and can stay balanced and time rather than have to hit at? Or does the heavier shaft allow you to control essentially strike and timing and let you be more positive with it? That will determine which one's the better one for you. Sometimes we do find just playing different shots, play a few shots. If you flight the ball down, take a little bit off, fade it. If there are go-to shots that you play on course, then play those, because if you're tight call between the two of them, one of them will let you do it more naturally. It'll feel easier to create those shots, and you'll have a tighter control on them if you're at the kind of the higher level, elite level. If you're more of a kind of mid-handicap player, if you're just looking for reliability, then you'll find one will just strike more consistently and then go with that one. But it'll just feel easier to deliver the better one, even if that's the heavier one for you. Sean Jones, 55. Hi, so I'm currently in the AMT red stiff shafts, but feel like the long runs get too light with the AMT technology. What are some similar shafts I could try that don't have the AMT tech? Thank you. It is the big issue with the AMTs, is that the principle's great, long irons get much easier to swing, but in practice you've got two sets of irons in there, and there comes a point where either the short irons get too heavy or the long irons get too light, as you've just found there. So the AMT reds and the stiffs, if I'm right, the AMT reds and the stiffs are around the 100 gram mark. So, you know, something in the mid irons. So something like the Nippon 950 is not going to be a million miles off. The original one, the Neos are going to be a little higher balance. AMTs have a little bit of a swing in the bottom end. Dynamic Gold 95 is going to swing a little bit more bottom end weighted. If you want something that's a bit more stout and more solid feeling, then actually the Project X Red in the 5.0 100 grams, that could be a really solid option. That's going to give you a little bit more guts to hit against. If you want something that swings a little bit lighter in the head, then a KBS Tour Light's going to be a higher balanced version, or the Tour V in the 100. So there are several shafts at that weight that don't have that ascending mass tech. There are actually quite a lot of them. but balance point wise, there will be something to suit either a stronger feel, more responsive feel, heavier balance, lighter balance. So there are lots of options there. So anywhere that's got, depending on where you're based, go to somewhere where you can try a few, and there are plenty of options there for you. We'll definitely find something that will suit, but ideally test a few out and make certain. But there are loads of options. Tony, by the way, 7543. Hi Simon, suggestions for bringing down launch angle and flight of a 7-wood, please. Using the Ventus Red 7S and the QI4D head, already lofted down, so a lower launch shaft maybe, or heavier. I mean, your only option with that, I wouldn't go heavier. Heavier it'll bring flight down, but heavier is likely to, it'll either go right and pop it up, or it's going to drop behind and you're going to chase it over. So it'll go lower, but it'll go lower and left. So potentially, I mean, Ventus Red, whilst of the Ventus shafts is the softest tip of the Ventus range, it isn't a soft tip shaft. It's not a particularly high spin relative to the breadth of shafts on the market. I mean, you could certainly go into something like you could go into something like a Ventus Blue. It's got a stiffer tip, but it's not necessarily going to bring launch down that much. So it's either essentially the 5-wood head to bring the loft down. It could be to do with dynamic loft, just making sure that you're covering it, just to make sure it's not a kind of a pick and adding loft on it. But it would be something with a stronger, stiffer tip. I'd want to keep the weight the same so the timing doesn't change. But essentially you're trying to kill any extra kick in the bottom end as much as possible if you're doing it through shaft. Same answer as earlier. If loft can come down a bit more, great, but you're going into a 5-wood to do that. Barber 66, hi Simon, if possible could you hit using a graphite Project X LZ senior shaft? I'd really like to be able to see what to expect with a slower swing speed. Hopefully you have your time with the tech problem. Thank you for that. Hopefully that is it, but let's not talk about that just to jinx something. We've asked Claude the problem and see what he might be able to help. The Graphite Project X LZ senior shaft, so the Graphite LZ shaft, you'd have to be a bit more specific about which one, because I don't think they're currently in the aftermarket range. There is one. There may have been some in stock shafts, but LZ, other than there were some old LZ wood shafts that they did a long time ago, but we don't currently have. So let me know if there's a specific model, whether it's irons or woods, and I can then give you a better answer on that. So just add on the bottom just which exact model that is, and whether it's irons or woods, and I can hopefully either find something similar to replicate it, or hopefully maybe find it somewhere in the back, but I think it might be an old model if it's what I think it is. Marshall Derby 8134, do you have any tips for getting Align Max grips in the same position for every club? Are you getting the same face angle for every club? So we have a laser alignment marker in the when we put the grips on, but there is, even using that down the top, ultimately it's an experienced technician doing it. Our eyes are all a little bit different, so we set them up so that the center line is absolutely down the middle. There are some players whose concept of what's on straight is actually open or closed. So it's something that is quite personal. I would say getting one on to the position where you're completely comfortable that it is what you determine to be straight, and then having a look at little things like this may or may not be visible on the top of this, but you can use things. Actually, let me get the Align Max grip because that'll come out a bit more clearly. So you can use what I do when I'm aligning grips is I use the markings on the top, reference that relative to where the club face is. So if we want to absolutely ramrod straight, then I'm looking for the club face to be completely vertical and that perpendicular. Looking at, on these, you've got markers there and here, so you're trying to align right down the middle of the golf prior to on that peak, which actually visually can look slightly off skew because of you've got the width of the P and the G are wider than the others. So for us, the middle of the grip to me is down the center of the capitals. So actually sits slightly round from the center of the lowercase letters. So that's often somewhere where they can look a little bit off. And once you get those lined up, then you've got to turn it around and make sure that that is absolutely ramrod straight down the back, which often involves just a little bit of tweaking. So the align grips can be a little bit more complicated to line up. I think the key to it is get one benchmark for what you feel is straight, and then use those methods to make sure that everything else matches up to them. So I do mine. I have the calibrate grips. I have a ridge down the back of mine. I play them what we play as straight, but I'll always sort of make sure they feel, when I set up, that my natural position sets the face up absolutely dead square. Some of the club faces can be a little interesting to line up. The more offset you have, then the more that the face and the shaft are offsets to one another. And straight can often be when the toe and the, sorry, I get another club head for this. What can look straight is often when the front of the hosel and the toe are in line. So the more offset you have, the more you're going to likely close that in to make it look square. And sometimes heavily offset, sitting absolutely dead perpendicular to that grip line, can look open. So again, there are some variables with regard to the club head setups that can render a club face to look open or closed at address, depending on the offset lines, the toe lines. But make sure that you're comfortable with it first. Get a reference one that you go, right, yep, that's straight for me, and then benchmark the rest of them off that. That would be my advice on that. Where has my sanity gone? Something we're all questioning, that, isn't it? Using 12 volt +4 mid-size grips, need 6 to 9 grams of lead tape on irons and wedges for feel. Considering lighter Jumbo Max Zen extra small grips to reduce weight for feel. Larger size and no tape worth testing. Absolutely. You know, the +4 mid-size grips get up to 64 or 66 grams, which is, you take over a standard grip weight, you're looking at 12 to 15 grams of extra weight in the grip, which is why you've then got to lead tape the head up. And then you're putting 20 to 25 grams of extra weight in the club, which is a lot. If we did that with a shaft, you'd all think we're mad, thinking, well, that's not going to change anything. So it has a noticeable effect. And then you're bookending the weight in the head and in the grip. So it does change the flow of the club. So absolutely, you know, getting the grip weight back down into the 50s at the very least, ideally 52 to 55, certainly sort of, you know, the more you can get it to 55 grams or so, the better. And that will let you then take back another kind of, 10 grams, another at least 4 or 5 grams off the head. So you're still then losing another 15 grams off the club. Yeah, absolutely. I think just as long as the, I think no tape, you're going to need something to secure the grip to the club. So a single layer of tape for securing it on. But yeah, definitely worth testing. And maybe, you know, we're fortunate we can blow grips on and off to test and show. Is it on? Okay, right. We've got through a while, let's give it another go. So worth testing, yes, but you'll need a layer of grip tape or adhesive tape for it to stick to, essentially. But yeah, definitely worth a go. It's G. Thompson, looking at getting a fitting starting with putter, open to anything but interested in the Spider Tour X or a Zero Torque 5K. Would like to try some of the offerings from Lab. Do you fit the Oz 1i and the VZN 1i? So I have to double check with the latest ones in yet. I think it is actually. But yes, we've got each of the Lab putters. Everything that's out and available we've got. I think the latest one is either just come out or about to. I'd have to double check that. But yeah, we've got all of those. We've got the Spiders. We've got other zeros like even roll, sort of effectively kind of zero torque style, as well as the traditional ones. But yeah, so being open-minded, absolutely, and then seeing how each of them feels, how natural they feel to line up from a head shape point of view, how easy it is to square off, how repeating your data is. And yeah, one of them will come out as best. Feel off the head as well. That's a really important thing, sound and feel. So yeah, open mind is always great. But yes, we have all of those to test. So feel free to come whenever you like. Tony, by the way, PS, just shot my lowest score ever, 68, good score, which is partly down to swing work and partly down to getting the right clubs from you guys. Thanks so much for all your help and recommendations. Well, I tell you what, anything sub 70 is a great score. That's great work. I know how much Tony puts the hours in, so really pleased for you to get that reward. That's great scoring. It's better than I did this weekend. So congrats and keep going. Let's get that 65 in the bag soon. Marshall Darby, could you suggest good alternatives to the Oben CT115 stiff shafts if there are any? So the Oben's great shafts, very neutral balance point. So in terms of in steel, they're on a huge amount. I mean, at that weight, so the stiffs actually end up more like a 110, 112 gram weight in the CT115s. So KBS dollar taper isn't a million miles off. Tor V swings a little bit lighter. So some of the KBS is actually really good ones. If you want a softer, more responsive feeling shaft, then actually the KBS Tor and the Reg isn't a bad option. There's a bit more kick from the tip of the shaft. The dollar taper and the Tor V are going to feel a little bit more stout. But in steel, those would be the ones that I would go to. I mean, you might find the nip on the 1050 GH in the X, but that's going to have a little bit of a harder feel. The thing with the CTs, they're a really smooth feel, which is why that KBS Tor Reg in the 110 gives that bit of kick and feedback and feel. So that could well be your best option. There are some composites, but they're going to feel harder, and I think that's what you'll give up going into a graphite versus those steels. So I would give some of those a go for sure. Lil Big 73, hi Simon, love the lives, thank you very much. Is there a way you can do a quick test between, say, a mini driver versus GT1 Tour or a strong lofted fairway? Need on a driver replacement to get off the tee? Certainly. Very quickly, Sully Sard, any thoughts on the new Lab putter? I've actually not experienced it yet. I'd have to double check with Matt. So it's either out or just about to be out. So I've not actually been up there for a couple of weeks since my session, but I'd have to get Matt's feedback on that and give that to you. But yeah, as soon as we can, we'll give you a bit of answer. We'll get him onto another live, and then you can fire all the putter questions at him. I'm doing a bit less on that at the moment, but you know, I think what Lab are doing really well is actually starting to vary the head shapes and the feels off their putters. So they're branching out a little bit more to actually kind of cover a few more of the bases, which is quite smart. And clearly they want a bit of growth as well. And there's only a limited amount that the bigger head shapes, the more kind of quirky head shapes actually are going to cut it for a lot of players. So they've done really well with the 2.2, 2.1, 2.2 in particular. We've done some good results with that. So something a bit more traditional, gone down very, very well. But once I've had a chance to try one, then I'll try and let you know for sure. So I'm going to get, if it's off the tee, I'm not going to get a GT280 because I think there are better teeing off ones. I'll get the R7 in the 11.5. Actually, no, we need to be a 13. So I'll get GT1 Tour and I'm going to get the Cobra in a 13.5 just to test out there. So I'll be back very shortly. Where is there we go. Right. So I've gone for the Cobra simply because it's ahead a really rate, and I think it's underrated generally. So sort of get something that's a little bit different. Let me pop the GT1 Tour on first, and what I'll do is I'm going to loft that down as well. So. And I'll put the Cobra in its standard position. Just got to get these two heads set up so I can put the same shaft in both. Whilst I'm doing that, Barber 66, sorry, it's for irons, 4.0A, 60 ohms. So that is a shaft that I believe is something that they only have in stock options, if they do anymore. It's not one that remains as an aftermarket option, I don't think, but it's not one we've actually got in currently. And ultimately, what a lighter, softer profile shaft will do for you in irons, one, give you a bit more feel. The lighter weight in principle makes it easier to swing. If that helps get stronger timing, then it's going to mean more club speed, certainly more better ball speed, which means a little bit more height just purely from ball speed. And if it allows you to control the strike a little bit better, then potentially tighter dispersion. But depending on what you're comparing it against, just the profile of the shaft, you might gain a few hundred revs of spin, you might gain a degree or so of launch, but it's unlikely to do much more than that. Ultimately, what that would do versus other options is just make it easier to move the club. So give you a more consistent strike would be what that's going to do. Without having anything to compare it against, if you've got an option to give me a comparison to compare it against, I can let you know how much of a difference in principle it would make. But it will be a different person to person to how much difference you're going to see. So I'm going to start, actually I want to put this on, I'm going to start with this off a tee. I'll need to use a slightly higher tee for the mini driver, but seeing as we're talking about it as a teeing off option, let's tee it up. Let's get that sitting in here. Right. So in principle, GT1 Tour lofted down a bit. It's down at sort of 13 3/4, 14 degrees. Should keep spin down. Oh, it's a really bad swing. Give that one more. That's not going to do it any justice whatsoever. Swing line's all right, but I nearly missed it. So let me try that again. There we go. I mean, that's actually one element of this. What the mini drivers do, you've got more club head. There's more forgiveness out of it. So you can, as a teeing off club, you can get away with a little bit more. So that one, 150 efficiency, 12.5 launch, 3,000 spin. It's still, to all intents and purposes, that is still, now, okay, GT1 is not the lowest spin fairway head out there. There are going to be other fairway heads I can get that spin down to driver level. So you can get a bit more run out of it. So, you know, we could get that spin down to 2.5 with another head. Won't carry any further, but would chase out a little bit more. But there's not a vast amount of, when we're looking at it versus a mini driver, yeah, there's much more real estate to hit with on this. There's bigger face, there, and you can move the weight further from the face, you can make it much more stable. So the one thing you're definitely giving yourself with the mini driver is more forgiveness, better off-center performance. So way, way easier from a contact point of view. And certainly what this head does, that spins down. So it's basically a driver spin. So if I take club speed wise, there's 0.3 of a mile an hour club speed. And actually I got 1 mile an hour less ball speed out of that. But the spin's 750 revs less. So with some of the mini drivers, the GT280 is more of a 2-wood. So that's not as low spin as some of these. So if you're looking as a driver alternative, well, you can get a driver flight out of this. Now, relative to some people say, well, why would you not then use the driver if this is just as low spin? As long as you don't need a really low loft, that is, because otherwise you're not getting out of the mini driver. But if you're comfortable with the driver, well, I'm missing out on, just put the context on it, I'm missing out on reasonable bit of club speed. You know, longer shaft, lighter head weight allows me to move the club a lot faster and generate a little bit more distance. You know, so that's now gone 20 yards further. Quite like that one. You know, I talked about changing driver earlier. Maybe I shouldn't. So For no more effort, I've got 6 miles an hour club speed and 10 ball speed. Spins a little bit less, launch a little bit more because I can hit up on it. I hit up on it a little bit more because it's lower loft. So we've just then picked up 20 yards, and it's in play. So driving's been a strength for me. So I'm maybe not the best example of this, but if you can hit driver well at the longer length, you're going to gain speed. If dispersion and control and length of club feels uncomfortable at full length, then there are some mini driver heads that you can get. Like there's an 11 degree in the R7, there's an 11 degree in the Callaway, where you can get driver performance and flight out of it, which will, the shorter shaft will make it easier to hit straight, but it won't be as long as a full driver could be. But if going shorter controls it, then it's a great compromise. But then low lofted fairway is still less forgiving. The smaller head, if you're playing as a fairway wood, gets the mass into the bottom of the ball better and is easier to strike off the ground. And that's why we still don't do very many. We do the mini drivers for someone who's either monstrously long and is just looking for take Matt's a 340 plus driver of the ball. So he wants a club at 290 to 300 yards for driving short par fours. Wouldn't that be nice? But he's not using a fairway wood to approach greens because he's never going to need it. Unless he plays a 700-yard hole. So it's 650. So for him, the fairway wood's irrelevant. But for most of us, a fairway wood, you're using that to get to greens, to get to par fours, to get to par fives. And so actually playing it off the ground, the smaller head becomes better for that. So there are pros and cons of both. But if you're using it as a teeing off club, you're just giving up margin of error by playing the fairway wood. And so as long as if it's just for teeing off, then your mini driver gives you the advantage big time there. Where is my Santi gone? Thanks for clarity. Pleasure. Marshall Derby, thanks for the responses. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for the questions. Simon Muggleton, 4688, thanks for in-depth answer to my earlier question. Much appreciated. While in CB shafts, is it ever used and needed in iron shafts, or is it just woods? It is absolutely required in irons as well, although you tend to see, you're not really going to see shafts that they would categorize counterbalance in irons. I think the closest that we get to it of any of the kind of the relatively, LA shafts are actually pretty counterbalanced. So the Acra, the IS range are pretty high balance, and the LAs are counterbalanced, but they tend to be heavier weights. I think other than that, in the graphites, there are very few. The KBS, the TGIs are pretty neutral. They're not overly tip heavy. But if we're needing to get mass away from the club head and make them swing light, Acra with the SRT range in woods and irons, that's designed to be a bit more counterbalanced. But in the lightweights, they're more kind of junior, senior. They're designed at lower speeds. But because of the shorter length of club with the irons, you're less likely to see them. They're certainly not categorized as counterbalanced. They're just a little higher balance. It's more required in woods. The longer club is more likely to get trapped behind. And so there's more requirement for that high balance in woods than there is in irons. So there are some, but they're just not going to be called it. Golf Nerd 3, why is it that in most shaft product lines the torque drops the most from 50 plus to 60 plus? And is it essential for high swing speed players to play minimum 60 grams to feel significant stability? The answer is no. That last bit is absolutely not. You've got some really stout shafts. If you take some of the Acra, the TZ Green, the 50 is a really stable shaft. There are some solid shafts at that weight. I guess 60 grams over the TR, Ventus TRs, the 5s, the new range are around the 60 gram mark. But there are some shafts that play pretty stout down in the 50s. It's just how you use that. Where you tend to find that the more aggressive, faster swingers use the weight a bit more. They tend to be physically a little bit stronger to create that speed. You do get players that are more kind of crack of the whip and are much more slight in terms of frame and don't use the weight that much. But then they're not probably needing, because it's not such a kind of aggressive move on the shaft, you're not needing as rigid a feel to get control. Ultimately, if the club and you are in sync, then a good grade, if we take something like the Blue Board 53 and an X, Diamana is a really stable shaft, like 54 grams. And that has a very stable tip and feels quite tight at impact. So if the club's timing well, it's going to feel controlled. So the answer is you don't have to go minimum 60 grams to feel significant stability. It's more if that shaft weight is required for you to time it and control the club head, then that's when the gain is there in the weight. But you tend to find that the strongest swingers will use that weight. So that's why you tend to see those weights play that much more stout. And ultimately, the torque line dropping, going from 50 to 60, you're adding, I guess, proportionally, there's that bit more addition of material to get the extra weight there. And whether that means they can utilize some of the materials a little bit differently, they're not having to compromise sometimes to go really low torque at a lightweight shaft, it can feel harsh and brittle. So there's a bit of managing the kind of player that they're essentially have decided is going to be using that weight. There's a load of assumptions from the shaft manufacturers of who they're likely to be building those profiles for. And ultimately, as weight drops, the chances are it's a less aggressive move. It's a player that doesn't, as a broad generalization, generally doesn't require that rigidity from the shaft. So getting lightweight and really strong low torque, it's just really high grade materials and means really expensive. But then having said that, really high grade and expensive also means smoother and not as dead. So, but essentially lighter weight, they're expecting a higher torque requirement, a less rigid requirement from someone using a lighter shaft. So they do graduate them through, but ultimately if you're looking for something lightweight and really stable and low torque, Acura, probably one of the best ones to go to. TZ Green in the 50 is a really stable shaft at that weight and feels pretty damn stable as well. A Golf 3, I play 43X, but it just feels like the shaft torque's open when I really go at one. Ball speed, high 160s to low 170. Yeah, depending on which model in the 43X it is, a lot of them will feel that way. And ultimately, yeah, you've got, if at contact you're a little toe side in particular, then you just are going to feel that twist a little bit of impact. So depending on what shaft you've got, there could be other ones out there at a similar weight that are going to feel a little bit more stable, but they are relatively limited just because who they're designing, who they are assuming is going to use that weight of shaft. Incubus 1981, that's an interesting one. Hey Simon, I have a question you may answer. I shortened my 3-wood shaft by 1 inch, so it's like a 5-wood length. Strike dispersion got a lot better for me. My club fitter recommended this to me. Is there a question there? I mean, absolutely is something that we do a lot with fairways. We tend to go 42.5 on a 3-wood rather than 43. And shorter, ultimately strike is king. We're not, on the fairways, we're not necessarily trying to squeeze an extra 5 yards out of it or 10 yards that we might do with a driver. So reliability and contact is on the smaller head. There's less forgiveness than a driver. You can get away with a little less. So we would go shorter to get that strike. But if there is another question that was meant to be in there that I've missed or that I misinterpreted, just quickly fire it in before we finish and I'll get back to it. EROE, Simon, what's the closest line Q shaft profile to the Ventus Black and the Ventus Red TR? So Ventus Black, the closest profile will be the Line Q White. It will feel softer in the handle, no doubt about it, because it is. It's designed about responsiveness, but stability. That whole Line Q range is about responsive feel and smooth feel. So it is stable. It swings more tip heavy than the current Ventus range. It swings more like the first gen Ventus, but that would be the closest to the Black. TR Red, it kind of isn't really. The blue is much softer in the middle, so that's not going to feel anywhere like the TR. The red's a really nice smooth shaft, but will probably play a little softer than Ventus Red TR. So actually, the Line Q White is probably your best bet all round, I would say, but will swing more tip heavy, that's for sure. It's G Thompson, currently playing Nike VR2 Pro combo irons, God takes you back. Blade short, split cavity mid and pocket cavity long. Love the feel and the look of the blades, but curious would some options to consider be P7CBs. Relative to those split cavity irons, they're very, very similar. You're not going to get the clubs that are going to have a similar sort of combo to them would be things like Mizuno M13, Titleist T150. Let me think through where you go from a solid short iron progressing to a bit of tech. You'd have to, with TaylorMade, you'd have to split between the P7 CB and a P770 to get the tech at the top end of the set. But it's a stark split rather than a progressive progression, rather than designed progression like you'd get out of the 150s or the 13s that are kind of designed as combos but in one set. What else would I throw in there? Wouldn't throw the Strixons aren't quite there. I'm missing something. Callaway AR150s, but they go a little bit lower spin, I would say. I'd say one of those two, the Mizuno or the Titleist, are probably going to be your closest bets as things currently stand of what's out. 7CBs, like those mid irons into short irons, are going to feel nice and solid, but they won't give you the performance in the longer irons. So if you want a bit of tech in the longer irons, those Titleist or Mizunos I would go with. The Mizunos are just their new updated 6, 7, and 8 iron heads are basically just out now. So yeah, they've remedied the issue with those by the looks of it. And then Incubus 1981, we'll finish on this one. Sorry, no more characters left. Question was, is this a common thing to do? So yeah, absolutely. So something that you're playing the lowest lofted clubs that you play off the ground with the longest shaft you're playing for something that's not teed up as well. So losing a little bit of shaft length, if you're timing it better, striking it better, you're getting in the right bit of the face more regularly, 100%. For an inch off the shaft length, you might drop, what we see with the driver to that, you might drop with the same shaft weight and things, you might drop 2 or 3 miles an hour club speed. But if you're striking it better, you're more than picking that up in ball speed. And if you're striking it well, you're picking it up in flight efficiency as well. A low heel or low strike on a fairway spins up and will come out weaker. The current heads are better for that, but if you're getting strike consistently, you say the ball speed gain and the flight gain massively override the club speed loss. If you gain confidence, you might well pick some of that club speed back up as well. So something we do an awful lot of, and yeah, definitely something to consider. I can answer this next one very quickly. It's G. Thompson. Have a good evening. There's a very quick one. I'll do Paul Stewart's one. Which graphite iron shafts are more tip heavy? MMT, Mitsubishi's, they're really tip heavy. The Axiom swing fairly tip heavy, and actually some of the graphite design, the Tour ADs, swing relatively tip heavy. But MMTs are the most tip balanced of any shaft, the graphite shafts that I've played and that we've tested out here. So I would go with those. And Jasper L578. Again, I'll do this very quickly. It's very kind of you to send it in, so I'll answer it. Has hybrid tech moved on from the G4 10 days? The ping ones, mine still feels great, but wondering if I'm giving up much. So the 410 head, if you want to retain a little bit of spin, was great. If you strike it like an iron, if you squeeze it a little bit, it was a fantastic head. Has hybrid tech moved on? In principle, a little bit. Center of gravity's dropped a little bit, but G440 head versus 410, 440 will go longer, but they will spin noticeably less. So that's one of the big challenges we see with hybrids. A lot of them are very low spin. And actually, if you're replacing a long iron for something more forgiving, you're not necessarily just wanting it to bomb. We're actually looking for it to stop with a bit of control. So if you're still hitting your 410 well, ball speed will still be good. If the spin's in a good window, there's very little to gain from a change. You're more likely to find you've got a lofted up a couple of degrees to get the spin back, and then it's more of an up and out flight, whereas you might find your 410's more of a mid-launch, mid-spin window. So very much based on that spin profile as to whether there is any benefit whatsoever. But great how the 410's were. Thank you for bearing with us this evening. We are actively looking into the sound issues and the tech issues and trying to work out what it is. It's not a PC capability side of things. It's just a little gremlin somewhere that won't go away, but we will do our best for it. Enjoy this week. Scottish Open at Renaissance. That's going to be a fascinating watch to see who's dialing in their links game. Not quite sure what I think of the final qualifier thing for the last 12 spots at the Open. I think it's a bit gimmicky personally. If you just missed out at final qualifying, you've missed out. And actually, are they stopping someone who really has played well all season getting into it and deserves a spot? Just my opinion, but I don't really like that last chance qualifier thing personally. But who knows? You might get more people watching on YouTube. So we all like a bit of that. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for the questions. We'll see you next Monday. I'll have to check who I've got on with me. Hopefully someone else, but hopefully we'll give you a nice entertaining show. And glad those of you that write in are enjoying it. Have a great week. See you next week.